And that's before, I think, why it was so fleeting, is there was no support to maintain it. So again, there it was, this thing that, well, for all of you know it, it's so compelling. You want to know what it is, you want to know the truth about it, you want more of it. And and it seemed that hanging around in the field of a teacher like Rajneesh at that time, that's what was happening. So I just wanted to spend all my time there.
And did it happen more and more, or?
It happened, yes, it did happen more and more, but although I didn't really notice it, the real I'm not there experiences pretty much only happened in his presence.
Well, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So it took someone, enlightened person, let's say, to be there, and that triggered something here for you?
I've never really understood the mechanics of what was happening. Now, having studied the diamond approach for so long, I've got some sense that the idealization transference, as psychology would call it, was at play in a major way, and that my own capacity for this was being put on this perfect place to put it. But nevertheless, his transmission and his field that this man was putting out, I was open to. Right. Somehow my soul was able to let it affect.
There was a resonation, a mutual resonation somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there was, I think the chief thing was, I don't remember there being fear, whereas at other times there had been fear. Even on the LSD there was fear.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting difference.
And yet there's a field there that supports that kind of thing, which is a whole structure that supports it. It's the norm, as opposed to in normal society that's unusual.
Exactly. I mean, it was very much what was happening, and he was definitely a, class him as a guru, if you like, and working with transcendent realization as opposed to the more embodied realization. And he was definitely about what lies beyond the ego. Get rid of the ego and boom, there you are. And so there was very much a lot of emphasis on being in the state.
So your thought at the time was, that was encouraged, was if you could get rid of the ego, then you'd be in this state all the time, or a lot more of the time.
That's exactly it.
And that's what you were trying to work towards somehow with meditation. And were you still doing encounter groups then?
Once I got to Poona, pretty much not, because I didn't have any money, and I was far more interested in being a part of the community and being closer to Osho, or Bhagwan as he was then.
Yeah.
So no, I stopped doing encounter groups and devoted myself to him and his presence.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair way to put it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he was there quite a few years, I think, because he obviously moved to Oregon in the States.
Right.
And you moved there with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was there I was really closely involved for 10 years. About 77 to 87, really.
Yeah. And I was thinking 87 was when it started to fall apart, wasn't it? When he got arrested, was that right?
That was more in 84, 85.
Okay.
Yeah, we got kicked out of the States. I was at the ranch in Oregon, the day he got arrested. And,
right.
And then really, he did the sort of traveling around the world and winding up back in India. And here's the thing again. He was no longer at the ranch. And all of a sudden that particular experience wasn't accessible to me.
That must have been quite a shock.
It was, it was a huge shock. I felt like a part of me was gone.
Yeah.
So I spent 2 years, I worked and made money so I could go back to India to be with that again. So it
It's
was
so compelling, isn't it?
It was, and it was clearly becoming clearer and clearer that it was out there. Or my belief was that he owned it, and I did not. And that was very much supported in that community. He was really the only one seemingly able to be realized. So that's really, in the end, that, and having met my now wife, that led me away from that community.
Okay, and you think you went and lived in the desert for a time?
Well, no, the desert was inside.
It's interesting, you said in your notes you were in a desert for 4 years, and I took it as a physical desert as well as a spiritual desert, but it was
No.
actually a spiritual desert.
It was only a spiritual desert.
Okay.
Actually, I was living in Marin County, north of San Francisco, which is very lush. And
Yes.
but with the absence of any contact with the kind of selflessness and the states that go with that I was getting around Osho, it really did feel like a desert. I was working, I was living a normal life, but my heart was broken,
Okay.
I think.
So you were kind of living in the personality or in the ego structure, and you found it hard to connect with some kind of depth inside you.
Yeah, I think it would be more to say that I was practicing hard. I had a very, very staunch meditation routine of my own design at that time. But what was barren was I felt so lost. I felt like I was lost in space or in the desert. There was no richness. There was no... there was nothing to make me come alive. And it wasn't, and I think something happened at a certain point where something arrived in the mail. Actually, it was a leaflet to do the Fisher-Hoffman process. And I had a friend who'd done it or was doing massage at it or something, and something said, I got to do something. And it turned out what that was about is exploring what the ego is, or what conditioning is, would be a better way of saying it. And Osho had always talked about you're just a carbon copy of your parents, and talked about conditioning, but I didn't really get what he meant until I did the Hoffman process. And it was that then opened me to understanding that I had to go in some way through the ego, not around it.
And then you heard about the Diamond Approach, the Ridhwan school.
Yeah, I heard about that in a funny way. I was actually thinking I might go off to some forest monastery in Thailand or something, and some friends of mine actually very casually just threw a leaflet down of a group that was being started by Sandra Maitri. And so I thought, well, I'll check that out before I sort of turn my life upside down again. And it was exactly what I was looking for at the time. It was a teaching. I always saw that Osho was sort of gave me a map of the universe, and the Diamond Approach has sort of taught me how to navigate it. So,
And did your experience of non-duality, or whatever you call it, come back when you started the...